Hey, good morning. How's everybody this morning? I'm good. How are you? I see you, John. I know that was you. That's good. Everybody doing good? Did you have a good weekend?
As we're singing these songs this morning, I was having a rough time with this song. It was just like a mental block, and I don't know. Tommy, of course, was encouraging me and helping me through it, but there were several key changes, and there were several times that we did this song compared to the other one that we only did like twice. And so as I was thinking about this, after our rehearsal, it kind of got me thinking about how our walks look different as Christians. Some people, it takes longer to come to Christ, which is okay. And some people are born in the church and it just like clicks and they have a very long walk with God. And so I think that sometimes it's good to be reminded that even though our walks look different, that as long as the end goal is that we are saved and that we are glorifying God, then that's all that matters.
I
to us that you are faithful and that you are a provider and that you love us and that you are a Savior. I pray that as we are listening to Amanda speak today, that you would just speak through her and in her, and that would resonate in our hearts, God. I thank you for loving us unconditionally, even when we don't deserve it, especially when we don't deserve it. We love you. Amen.
Alrighty. Here we go. How's it going, y'all? Good. Quick shout out to Michaela Powers. We put a little pack on you. I cannot for the life of me figure it out back there. So she helped the sister out, and we were thankful for her. How y'all doing? You ready for summer? Ready to be set free? Yeah, it's coming, y'all. It's right there. How many days you got left? Anybody know the exact count? Alright. Is anybody done? Is anybody already done? Are y'all homeschoolers, private school? What's the secret of getting out that early? Probably homeschooling, probably private school. We love it. Alrighty, y'all. Well, I'm excited to be with you guys for week 2 of the Spider. We'll do the first week. Can I do the first week? Yeah, we all have a conversation about pride, right? We all got that struggle. We all struggling. That's right. Well, this morning we were going to talk about fear. Who's excited? Who doesn't love a little fear, right? I know. Good stuff. So my first question for you guys, well, actually my only question for you guys, is what are you afraid of? I just want y'all to yell out, what are you afraid of? What else? Keep going. Talk. Y'all have some weird answers. What else are y'all afraid of? Women. Wow. Okay. Alright, that's enough. Alright, some of you have some rather normal fears. Some of y'all I'm really concerned about. So we'll pray for y'all. I thought it'd be fun this morning. I'm actually going to share with you guys what are the top 10 fears for people. Top 10 fears. So I apologize if I cause you trauma because I have pictures. So, yeah. Okay, you ready? The first of the top 10 fears, is arachnophobia. Fear of spiders and other arachnids. We got any people afraid of spiders in here? Anybody not for me, I'm not doing it. Alright, here we go. Next one is ophidiophobia, fear of snakes. Anybody? That's mine. I won't do it. I went to the San Antonio Zoo for the first time last summer. The number of snakes that are native to Texas is ridiculous. Not about it. I was ready to move after that trip. Alright, acrophobia, fear of heights. Anybody not like heights? Yeah, a little bit roller coaster, the bungee jump. Alright. Aerophobia, fear of flying. Alright. Taking a train, a car, a boat, but dangerous planes. Alright. This one I think is interesting, but it's real. Xenophobia, fear of dogs. Some people are afraid of dogs. That's alright. Astrophobia, fear of thunder and lightning. So, Doug and I was not for you, not loving it. Trypanophobia, fear of injections. So no shots. We got some people. Alright, I'm passionate about that one. Social phobia, fear of social interactions. So y'all are stressed right now. You're not feeling this. Agoraphobia, fear of places that are difficult to escape. Sometimes we call it fear of crowded or open spaces. Izzy doesn't like the open ocean. I know that. She likes to be able to see bottom. And then the last one is mesophobia, fear of germs, dirt, and other contaminants. So some of y'all ended up imparting that on your parents after you were born. Alrighty. So in that list, right, there are likely 1 or 2 fears that you can relate to, right? You saw that picture and you're like, ew, not a fan, don't like it. If we're honest though, our fear of spiders or fear of germs aren't likely the things that keep us up at night. Merriam-Webster defines fear as an uneasiness about something you can't control that might affect you negatively by holding you back from your purpose, your calling, your relationships, and the reality that's in front of you. And so with that definition in mind, right, the more realistic fears that are probably keeping you up at night, right, are where will I go to college? Can I afford it? Or am I even smart enough to get in? Will I make the starting team? And what if all my friends do but I Will my relationships last? Am I enough, or will they abandon me and leave me all alone? Will my parents stay together? Is it normal for them to fight this much? And then as simple as, right, what if I fail? We all have fears that we wrestle with, but what happens when we ignore the spider of fear and only deal with the cobwebs that it creates in our lives? So often we're distracted and overwhelmed by the cobwebs that it seems impossible to ever deal with the actual issue, right? What the actual spider is. And so the cobwebs of fear can look like a lot of things. For some people, it's not taking steps towards the future or rushing the future instead of waiting on God. We become so paralyzed with fear that we never make decisions regarding our future because we're so scared of making the wrong one. Or we allow fear to pressure us into making a decision before God ever calls us to make that decision. Because we don't like not having answers. We don't like not being in control. Another problem might be we won't go deep in relationships, or we stay in relationships longer than we should. We're afraid of being hurt, so we refuse vulnerability or accountability to the people in our lives, right? We won't trust anyone. Or it's the opposite. We stay in a relationship that isn't good for us, that God didn't call us to be in, because we're afraid of being alone. Another one might be we operate in a false reality and don't hear the truth. We create false narratives about ourselves or others, and we project past hurts onto the people around us because we're afraid of getting hurt again. So it's easier to just pretend they were to hurt us, to put up those walls, and to just avoid that situation. We overthink things, right? We fear being controlled, so we try to plan for every possible outcome, much to our own detriment, and honestly to our own anxiety, right? Like, it's not something we needed to be worried about, but we just work ourselves up so much. We fear commitment. We never allow ourselves to be fully committed to any person or anything because we don't want to be disappointed. And sometimes, right, the last cobweb, we become manipulative. We overreact or we underreact in order to control a situation or even a person. The cobwebs of fear, they seem endless, right? And even writing them as someone who struggles with fear a lot, I was overwhelmed by kind of just the ugliness and the heaviness that fear can create in your life. Today, though, I'm here to remind you that you're not alone, that everybody has something they're afraid of, right? We just learned that this morning, right? There's something that we're all afraid of. And that there are solutions to help you, right? Not just clean up the cobwebs, but to actually deal with the problem of fear and to kill that spider. And Scripture is filled with men and women of God who struggled with fear, who battled the spider of fear. I think of Abraham, Moses, Esther, Peter, etc. Like you name it, the Bible's full of men and women who struggled. And this morning we're going to focus on the story of a man named Gideon. So he's probably someone who's familiar to you, especially if you grew up going to church and you're in Kidsman, right? Gideon's a guy we talk about a lot. And so we're going to talk about how he killed the spider of fear and went on to become the man that God called and created him to be. So if you'll turn with me to Judges chapter 6. It's a book we don't get to be in a lot, so I'm excited to be there this morning. And then also, if you don't have your Bible, we'll put it up here too. So, all good. But I do want to give you just a little bit of context for the book of Judges. So Judges takes place after Joshua's death and before the rise of Samuel and Saul, who JP talked about last week. And at this time, the Israelites have entered the Promised Land, but they haven't completely conquered it yet. There's still enemies in the Promised Land that they still have to conquer. And due to Israel's continual rebellion against God, right? You remember the story of the Israelites. It was a constant circle. They obeyed God. They did it. God, they didn't, right? Eventually, right, at the end of Judges, we see that Israel is eventually taken captive in the Promised Land, which is pretty crazy. And Israel will need a godly king, who, of course, will be Saul eventually down the road. But for the time being, God gives the Israelites judges, one of which would be Gideon. And the judge at that time acted as a leader for Israel. So he usually spoke on behalf of God, helped point the people back to God, and helped them to live according to what God was calling them to live. And so he helped lead the people to a restorative relationship with God and ultimately to defeat their enemies. Before this happened, though, the Israelites would be handed over to the Midianites for 7 years. Which is where our reading will start, and then we'll find Gideon wrestling with the spider of fear. So chapter 6, starting in verse 1, we're going to read all the way through verse 16. It says, "The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, marauders from Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east would attack Israel, camping in the land and destroying crops as far away as Gaza. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat, taking all the sheep, goat, cattle, and donkeys. These enemy hordes, coming with their livestock and tents, were as thick as locusts. They arrived on droves of camels, too numerous to count, and they stayed until the land was stripped bare. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. When they cried out to the Lord because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites. He said, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I brought you up out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live, but you have not listened to me." Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of the winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." "But Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." The Lord said to him, "I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." Our story starts out with the Israelites facing the cruelty of the Midianites, which was so severe that they were actually beginning to hide. They would hide in mountains, they would hide in caves, they would hide in strongholds, whatever it took to avoid the Midianites. And Israel, like I said earlier, found itself in this kind of vicious cycle where they would rebel against God, they face the consequences of the rebellion, they cry out to God, God would answer and help them, they would obey God for a little bit, and then they go back to rebelling against God. And we see at the beginning of this chapter that Israel cries out to God, asking for help, and he sends a prophet. And I love what the prophet says, and I think it's an important reminder actually for us that I think we can kind of miss. And so I'm going to read again, verses 7 through 10. It says, "When they cried out to the Lord because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites. He says, 'This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live, but you have not listened to me.'" The very first thing the prophet does for the people is remind them of God's faithfulness. God is always faithful, but we forget to stop and look back. And when faced with fear, we become so consumed with the obstacles in front of us that we forget to look back at the obstacles that God has already helped us overcome. The same God who was with us and helped us then is the same God who's going to be with us now and help us, right? It's like we sang this morning, right? You are the same God. And when we don't look back, we also forget the lessons that God teaches us, right? And so we end up repeating the same behaviors and the same mistakes, which is what the Israelites ended up doing. I'm not saying to focus on all the things in the past you wish you could change or you wish you could do different, right? That's not healthy. It's not a good way to go about life. But what I am saying is to look back long enough to recognize where God was faithful to you and where God worked. And his promises, right, to be with you now and to continue loving you and caring for you and working on your behalf. Moving forward, we see Gideon hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat. And if you don't know this, you don't thresh wheat in a wine press. That's not a thing. So he was scared, right? Like, he was living in fear, and that's right when we find him when an angel of the Lord comes to him. And so verses 11 through 12, it says, "Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, 'Mighty hero, the Lord is with you.'" So the angel refers to Gideon as mighty hero and reminds him that the Lord is with you. And fear so often causes us to forget who God is and who God says we are. It distorts the truth, or it hides the truth from us completely. It's almost like blinders that cause us to only see the problem in front of us and never the hope and solutions that are always surrounding us if we just took the time to look. In verse 13 it says, "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites." And so Gideon, in the midst of his fear, questions and he doubts God. And like him, we often do the same thing. We wonder if God is so loving and so caring, how can he let us struggle in this way? How can he let us deal with the fears that we have to? We somehow buy the lie that our fears are proof against God's goodness or God's faithfulness. In reality, though, it's quite the opposite. It's in the midst of our fears that we fully get to see the goodness and the greatness of God, because we recognize that we can't and don't have the strength to overcome those fears on our own. And our fear is also a reminder of our weakness and our desperate need for God. 2 Corinthians 12:9-10 says, "Each time God said, 'My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness.' So now, I, who is Paul, am glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Two, I think it's important, and JP kind of pointed out for me, right? It's also important to remember, too, that sometimes we miss God's faithfulness because it doesn't look like our plan, right? It's not that he hasn't been faithful, it's just that he has a different plan than we have for ourselves. And again, right, that kind of sneaks back into pride, like we talked about last week, right? Like us believing that we know better than God, when it's quite the opposite. And so we have to make a choice to either allow our fear to produce doubt or to produce faith. Verses 14-15 go on to talk about, right, our weakness and God's strength. It says, "Then the Lord turned to him and said, 'Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you.' But Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." What Gideon didn't understand was that he didn't have to have it all together and need all the answers in order to work in spite of his fears, because it wasn't about what he was capable of. It was and always was about God and what he's able to do in and through us. God tells Gideon to go with the strength he has, because even though Gideon isn't enough on his own, God is. It wasn't about the family or clan that Gideon came from, but it's about the one who was sending him. And we too get caught up in wanting to prepare and to plan for all the outcomes. We want to know all the things before we move or act. And we allow the fear of what might or could happen to keep us from being a part of the incredible things God is doing in our lives right here and now. And what we find, just like Gideon verse 16, is that we don't have to be afraid because God promises to be with us. I love Isaiah 41:10, which says, "Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand." I say all this not to say, right, that the journey to face our fears will necessarily be quick or easy. God actually tells us it will be quite the opposite. But there is hope, right? And the hope is that we don't go it alone. And that God has a plan for us that's ultimately for our good and for his glory. And so if we were to look at and summarize the story of Gideon in light of this idea of killing the spider of fear, we could say that fear was ultimately holding Gideon back from being the mighty hero God was calling him to be. Gideon could only see his insufficiencies and the obstacles in front of him, and not the God who's able to overcome those obstacles. And so Gideon had to choose to act, even though he didn't know the outcome. And as cheesy and on the nose as it sounds, right, like he had to choose to walk in faith. That's something we say all the time, but that's what he had to do in the moment, right? He had to choose to walk in faith. And so as we begin to close out, right, I want us to focus on what are the truths of fear, and then what are the solutions to combat those fears. Because here's the thing, you can't apply solutions to a problem you don't understand. And so I want us to make sure and be able to kind of recognize, okay, what does fear look like? And then what can I do to fight against fear? And so I'm hoping these truths bring just a little more clarity. But yeah, let's dive in. So the first truth of fear, fear causes us to miss the joys of today for the worries of tomorrow. Worries that may never come to fruition. God is doing some incredible things in your guys' lives right here and right now. Don't miss out on seeing or being a part of those things, worrying about a future that may never come to pass. You can't control the future. You can't change the past. But you can make the most of and be faithful to where God's placed you right here and right now. And so be wise in that, right? But don't miss out on here and now for the past or the future. The second truth is that fear demands that we think about and control circumstances that were never our story about in the first place. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline." And so God's desire is not for us to act or to live out of fear, but to do so out of his power and love and out of self-discipline. God is great enough to handle anything we may face, and he is faithful to meet our every need. We don't have to worry about this, right? When we know the truth of who God is, and not only know it, but we choose to believe it and then act on it, right? We talk about it all the time. It's one thing to know something; it's another thing to believe it. And so you have to believe, right, this to be true about God, and then act on it, right? Live in that. The next truth of fear is that fear produces doubt, but trust produces faith. I would argue that the opposite of fear is trust. Fearlessness is choosing to trust even when you don't have all the answers or know all the outcomes. Merriam-Webster defines trust as assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something, one in which confidence is placed. If you're anything like me, trust is not something that necessarily comes easily. I often struggle to let people in, afraid that I'll get hurt, or that I'll be disappointed, or that people will find I'm too much, or I'm not enough, and they'll leave, right? Right, in all honesty, one of my biggest fears is abandonment, right, of people leaving me. And so trust, it's hard for me to do that. The beautiful thing, though, is that we serve a God who will never hurt, never disappoint, and never leave us, right? And I can talk about that from experience. No matter the people who walked in and out of my life, the one thing that's never changed is God and his presence in my life. He has always been the same, he's always stayed the same. We can be assured of his character, his ability, his strength, and the truth of who he is, and we can place our confidence in him. If there's one thing in this life you can be 100% sure of, it's who God says he is. That is one thing you can put your full confidence in. And again, the only way we can be sure of and know these truths, though, is to be in the Word and to learn more and more about who God is. That's why we tell you guys all the time, read your Bible, right? We're not just saying that for the heck of it, right? It's because we know that that's the best way for you to combat these spiders that we talk about, is to be in the Word and to know who God is, and how he equips you to be able to fight kill these spiders. Right? And so Numbers 23:19 says, which I think is really cool, God is not a man, so he does not lie. He's not human, so he does not change his mind. Has he ever spoken and failed to act? Has he ever promised and not carried it through? And the answer is no. He's always been faithful. He's always carried it through. And then my final truth of fear is fear produces a false sense of safety. The safest place you can be is within God's will. So often we buy into the lie, again, that if we have all the answers and we plan for every outcome, then we'll be safe. Nothing can hurt us, right? We built our walls, we're good, we've prepped for everything. Here's a hard truth of life. Life is very, very unpredictable. It is impossible to plan for every single thing, for every outcome or scenario, and to prevent any of our fears from coming true. I wish I could tell you right now that none of your fears will come true. I don't know that, but that doesn't mean we have to live in fear and we have to stop living our lives, right? And lose what God has called us to be and what to do. The one who does know every outcome, though, and knows and has numbered all our days is God. And so we can rest in that and we can let go and choose to be okay with that. God has a promise, or I love that, right? God is sovereign, right? Sovereignty meaning God's absolute right to do all things according to his own good pleasure. God hasn't promised that it will be easy. He's told us it will be quite the opposite. But he does promise to be with us and to work all things according to the good of those who love him. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them." And the key to that verse is that goodness in life is not found in doing whatever we want or in things being easy. It's found in loving God and living our lives according to his purpose and plans for us. And again, how do we do that? Like we always tell you, get in the Word and talk to God. Pray. Invest in your quiet time. Put in the effort. Ask questions, right? Be in community. All of those things will help you to learn and to figure out what is God's will and his purpose and his plan for me. And know God. Allow him to transform your heart and your mind. All right, now that we have the truths of fear, right, what are the solutions? What do we do? How do we combat it? Well, the first is simply Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. Recognize that you don't, and you won't ever have all the answers. You need God. Peace is not the removal of hard circumstances, But it's a result of having trust in God that produces joy, even in the midst of those hard circumstances. The second one is to remember to talk to God and give thanks. Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything you can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus." Y'all tell God your fears and your struggles, because He's big enough to handle all of them. That's not something you have to hide or keep to yourself. And as I said earlier too, right, remember to stop and look back and give thanks. God has been faithful, He is faithful, and He always will be faithful. It's who He is, and it's a truth that we can cling to in the face of our greatest fears. Third, surround yourself with community that points to truth. Not only do you need to choose trust with God, but you also need to choose trust with the people that He's placed around you. This is one that I'm quite often reminded of, much to my not joy. But it's true, right? Like, it's hard to trust people, but you do have to trust people. God's placed good believers in your life who love you and want to pour into you. And so be willing to get vulnerable and be willing to accept accountability and allow people to speak truth into your life. Choose contentment. Recognize that there will be good days and hard days, but you can still choose to be content. We can be content in every circumstance, not because of who we are, but because of who God is. And then finally, be bold. Choose to act even when you're unsure of the outcome. Don't allow fear to cause you to miss out on the incredible plans and purposes that God has for you. And so yeah, we covered a lot this morning in regard to killing the spider of fear, but the final reminder I'm going to leave you with, and it's one that I constantly remind myself of as I'm trying to kill my own spiders, is to be patient and to show yourself grace. You can't kill your spider in just one night. It's not going to happen overnight. And the tricky thing about the spider of fear is that sometimes it seems to come and go, depending how the seasons of life change or your circumstances change. But remember, that peace and joy and contentment are possible no matter how your circumstances change. Gideon started his journey as a scared man threshing wheat in a wine press. And he eventually went on to become the mighty hero and the prophet that God called him to be. And so I'm excited to think about all the things that God can do in and through us when we're able to kill the spider of fear and finally embrace all that God has called and created us to be. And so my encouragement to you is don't allow fear to continue to rule your life, Put in the work, put in the effort to fight back, and to embrace all that God has for you. It's a long journey, but it's a good one and it's a hopeful one because it's the one you don't do alone, and it's one God promises to be with you in as well. So I'm going to pray for us, and then we'll get out of here. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this morning. God, thank you for the opportunity for us all to be together. God, thank you for the reminder that you are not a God of fear, but God, that you are a God of love. And God, that you call us to things that are greater and better. And so help us, Lord, as we seek to kill the spider of fear. Help us not to do it in our own strength or our own ability, but God, help us to look our eyes towards you, God. And to seek you for strength and wisdom and discernment. God, help us to lean into community. God, help us to be in your word. God, help us to talk to you. And God, to just trust you and trust your plan for each of us. God, be with us this week. Be with everybody as they finish up the school year and as we head into the summer. Help us to finish strong. And all we say and do, I pray and bring you glory. We love you and praise in your name. Amen. All right, y'all, we're going to go to groups. So find a leader. If you're new here and you don't know where to go, come see me, Jackie or Justin, and we will help you find where to go. Bye.